These interviews are part of a project titled No. 2 Construction Battalion's Legacy in British Columbia and Beyond, which is being undertaken by the British Columbia Black History Awareness Society. The goals of this project are to commemorate the No. 2 Construction Battalion by bringing historical awareness to the 12 known Black soldiers with a connection to British Columbia who served in the battalion. Veterans Affairs of Canada's Commemorative Partnership Program has provided funding to BC Black History Awareness Society for this project, which is a result of a recommendation by the National Apology Advisory Committee, where Prime Minister Justin Trudeau apologized on behalf of the Government of Canada to the No. 2 Construction Battalion and their families for how they were mistreated during the First World War and when they returned home to Canada. Conversations with descendants of the veterans who served with the No. 2 Construction Battalion can provide a deeper understanding of the personal and emotional impacts of the war, preserve important Black Canadian history that is often under-recognized, humanize these soldiers rather than present them as names of the past, and promote opportunities to learn more about the realities of these soldiers.
My name is Teresa Haas, and I'm a direct descendant of Charles and Nancy Alexander, who happened to be Edward Roy Alexander's grandparents. Roy was the third and last child of William and Mary Rowden Alexander. His grandparents were Charles and Nancy Alexander, who arrived in 1858 with approximately 800 other Blacks. And his other grandparents were Moses and Isabella Halcrow Rowden. Roy's mother was Mary. She was an Afro-Indigenous woman, and she was born in Saanich and died when Roy was only 3 years old. William, he's his surviving father, was an Afro-Canadian born in Victoria, and he also died when Roy was 9 years old. So Roy was left, as a very young child to be raised by his grandparents and other grandparents and aunts and uncles, and like the family took care of the children. In 1858, when they all arrived, it was the island was new to them, and this was their freedom. They left they left St. Louis, they went to California, and then they came from California up. And in California, they all had to register as being Black, and they all had to wear yellow tags, and they had to do this every year. They had to register that they were free Blacks. So coming up here, they didn't have to register. They didn't have to do anything. They just, worked the land and build the schools and build the churches and continue on and, show what it's like to live free in Canada. Carpentry and logging and farming was their way of life. And when the war broke out, they decided to, quite a few of them, quite a few of the Alexanders decided to fight for our country, to fight for our freedom, which Charles and Nancy had fought for so long, leaving St. Louis and arriving in Canada, is to be free. I actually discovered it through the magazine, the British Columbia Black History Timeline magazine, and I found Roy's name there, and I was like, his name's not Roy, it's actually Edward Roy, but everybody calls him Roy. Private Roy Alexander, son of William, right? I wrote it on there, and I just Roy Alexander, so I thought, I had to check into that, and then I found out I couldn't find a Roy Alexander. I only found an Edward Roy Alexander, and then that just kind of tied it all in together. But I thought, yeah, geez, one of the 5 British Columbians, It's just made my heart melt. That's got to be one of us, right? And it's like, Roy, yeah, cool. And to find out that he's even more related to me specifically because of his mother being a Rowden and my great-grandmother being a Rowden. So it just oh, we're really related. I was quite amazed, you know, like that he actually went to war and he came back and settled down in Vancouver. He enlisted in Vancouver and he returned to Vancouver to live out his days there, but he would come back to the island, you know, because he had to bury his grandmother and, you know, for funerals and whatnot. So a lot of his relatives had passed away, right? Like Charles had passed away in 1913. So, you know, like he was kind of left behind type of thing. And that's where he passed away at a very young age of like 43. He remained unmarried and had no children. I don't think the war helped him out very much. And I think he probably suffered from PTSD because he got into a little bit of trouble afterwards, you know, with the police. And then they didn't have the support. They didn't have any support from their army people, you know, or let alone the rest of the Canadian government, right? They didn't support them at all. So, you know, without having any support, you know, they had to do whatever they could do to survive. Well, now that the government's finally recognized them and acknowledged them, you know, but it took how many years, you know, to do this? But, you know, at least it's like reconciliation, right? It's just finally happening. But I did find Roy's headstone, and he's buried in Vancouver. And then he's got an uncle, Henry Wilson Alexander, who joined the CFC-CEF for World War I. There's quite a few Alexanders, like 2 Alexanders in World War I, 1 Walton in World War I, and then in World War II, there was a couple more Alexanders that joined in World War II. So once I found out that his nickname was Roy Alexander, not Edward Roy, right? I went on to the Find a Grave site and found out through there. Because once you find a grave site, it'll list all the spouses or the next of kin, so that ties all the names together. Well, with having like 800 of them coming up at the same time, so it was quite common for them to be within their own race, like blacks commuting with blacks and, you know, getting along with other people and things like that. So yeah, there was like the Wims connection, the Woods connection, the Estes connection. They all kind of married into each other. And that's how we got a big family. My great-great-grandfather was John, and he had a son named John, who had a son named John, who had a son named John, and they're all John Alexanders. So I just got in touch with my cousin John Alexander, who lives in Kelowna. Oh, at least 400 or more. Like 400 was the last time we had a family reunion, and that was like back in 1995 or something like that. So it's like, yeah, they've gotten a lot larger, and I found a couple of more of them that are down in the States too. So really? Yeah, they went back to the States. There's ways of finding out your family history, like through the Royal Museum archives is one good one there. The Times Colonist archives, the paper, like for obits and whatnot, and Find a Grave so that you can find where your people are, right? And, you know, find out their relatives and so on and so on. And then, you know, through the census too, it all ties them all in together. So going through the census and finding out who his mother's mother and grandfather and grandmother are, and then I've tied Gifford was his great-grandfather, Roy's great-grandfather. Yeah, so I tie in him, and then I've tied him all the way to Shetland Island, Scotland. So I've already talked to the archives in Scotland, and I've added Isabella's name to the family tree. It all tied in together. So it's like, okay, you know, I got Indigenous, I have Black, and I have Scottish. And like, what more can you have, right? This is Canadian. I started doing the research when I was diagnosed with colon cancer. I wanted to know, where did I get it from? Like, I had no symptoms and I wanted to know my history. So I started digging, and then I dug, and then I dug, and I kept digging, and it just, all these things just kept popping up between, you know, the census and down at the, you know, the museum on the website there, and through the BC directory, you know, like knowing where people were living and, you know, at certain times, and putting all the dots together, and it just kind of joined up, and it's like, wow, this is just totally amazing. So now I've been told I should write it down and put it in a book. 100 years later, and we're celebrating what they went through, you know, like what they gave us. So it's just a basic celebration to let people know that, you know, like, these people were here, they did all this stuff for us, you know, and this is what we have left behind us, right? For him to fight for our freedom, and that's what he gave us, you know, us, the rest of his descendants, all the rest of his family, is our freedom. And that's, you know, I like to thank him for that, right?